It's Woman's Song. This is Margaret Prescott, host of Sojourner Truth, and I'm delighted to welcome in studio a colleague, Sonali Kohatkar, co-director of the Afghan Women's Mission, which is a U.S.-based nonprofit that supports women's rights activists in Afghanistan. Sonali is not only a journalist, but she is co-author of Bleeding Afghanistan, Washington Warlords and the Propaganda of Silence. And of course, she is host and producer, executive producer of Uprising, which is a nationally syndicated radio program with the Pacifica Network, not only heard here on KPFK. Sonali, thank you so very much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Margaret. Thank
yeah,
you for
especially I know to that clip, a lot of concern. Taliban back on the rise happening in Afghanistan. The clip didn't necessarily focus on women, but the situation is such a mess in the country right now, civilians being killed. The analysis, the title actually for this piece was that the United States is getting nowhere in Afghanistan. We're going into year 10. And what I would like you to focus on what all of this means for women on the ground.
Well, I think the interview clip itself was interesting, given that it was done with a member of the parliament. And it should also be made clear that the Afghan government is no alternative to the Taliban. They're actually the ideological brethren of the Taliban. You could hear the almost admiration in this man's voice talking about the Taliban, because in many ways the Taliban are doing what the central government can't do, which is taking up arms and, in their minds defending their country. But really, they're also cut from the same cloth, whether you're talking about Pashtuns, which the Taliban are mostly formed of, or most of the other national minorities. The fact is that ordinary women in Afghanistan, even if there's a handful of women in the parliament, which really is a sense of tokenism, and it's sort of part of the Western model of what democracy is, right? Because the West thinks that if you have women in government, that means that women are represented. Now we can move on. But the fact is that ordinary women on the ground are caught between the U.S. forces bombing them and their children, the Taliban, burning them alive, shooting them, preventing their schools, and the central government doing more of the same. Stealing lands and being also very much complicit in the drug trade. All these three are forces that are enemies of Afghan women and really ordinary Afghan people, because the interests and the rights of ordinary Afghan women are the same as those of ordinary men and children, and they're not being represented anywhere.
Right, and also the civilian deaths that happened. I mean, just recently over the weekend, we heard about the children who were killed, and Rawa, they reported in a January death toll in Afghanistan, 100 civilians, and who knows, the number may also be higher than that. And also we hear reports of a great number of Afghan women that are committing self-immolation. They're burning themselves to death, and this is a very tragic response to some of the violence they're facing.
Yeah, in Tunisia, self-immolation of a man sparked a revolution and caught the world's attention. In Afghanistan, women have been burning themselves for the last 8 or 9 years, mostly in the western province in Herat, but really all over the country in numbers that are much higher. And you didn't see this phenomenon when even the Taliban were in power, and it exposes the desperation of Afghan women. It's a very dramatic way to kill themselves because they see absolutely no recourse, and it's getting so little attention. And you're right to bring up the bombing. On March 1st, U.S. forces bombed a province in Kunar where 9 children were killed, ages 9 to 15, boys, all of them. And the U.S. is practically denying that they made a mistake. And the press has given so little coverage to it. It's not an important fact that we're killing Afghan children, and that's really shocking.
Right. The other thing also has to do with the cost, not only in lives, but in other ways of the war. I mean, there's so much corruption, happening on the ground. But Sonali, I also wanted you to fill our audience in that even before this war began, the situation was pretty dire in Afghanistan. It is one of the poorest countries in the region. And what does that mean in terms of the day-to-day living conditions for women who have to raise their families under these conditions?
Well, it's a horrific set of facts. Afghanistan has had one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world, among the highest infant mortality rates in the world, lowest literacy rates for women in the world. And most of us know that women's education, it goes hand in hand with women's own awareness of their rights and women's ability to liberate themselves and survive. And those facts have hardly changed since the U.S. bombed Afghanistan in 2001 and since we've been occupying it. For all of the money that we claim we're pouring into Afghanistan, all the schools that George Bush claimed, girls' schools that were opening, the Taliban was just busy destroying those schools, and the U.S. has poured, I mean, it's all been a public relations effort. It hasn't really been a sincere effort into infrastructure to improve these horrific facts. So we still have high maternal mortality rates, infant mortality rates, and low literacy rates. In fact, there's one province in Afghanistan, Badakhshan province, in the mountainous regions that has the highest recorded ever maternal mortality rates in the modern world today. And it's just shocking. Going there, it shocks you. I'm from India, and there's horrible poverty in India. But when I went to Afghanistan, I couldn't bear it. I couldn't believe the grinding poverty there. I'd never seen anything like it.
Yeah, that's very, very sad indeed. And Sonali, of course, your work with the Afghan Women's Mission, for people who are concerned about what they're hearing and perhaps would like to support the efforts of the mission, what should they do?
Well, our website is afghanwomensmission.org. We raise funds for RAWA, the Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan, which are the oldest women's rights organization in Afghanistan, for their health and educational and other social and humanitarian work, but also their political work. So they can, certainly support us financially. We also support the work of very high-profile women activists like Malalai Joya, who's actually going to be coming into town in early April, and I hope listeners check her out. All the information's on our website, AfghanWomen'sMission.org.
Oh, very good. And we would love to talk with her, and thank you for helping us to be able to speak with her on Sojourner Truth. Now, Sonali, I know you've got to go. We have a few minutes, but I want to shift gears somewhat because this is International Women's Week, part of International Women's Month. We wanted to hear about Afghan women, but also just so many women have a balancing act. And you are a mom, you're a wife, you're a mom, you're a journalist, and you're an activist. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that workload and how being a mom changed anything. Did it? It
changed everything.
It changed everything.
Yeah, it changed everything. I learned to cut the fat from my life, if you will. And not literally, I wish literally, but figuratively. You learn to be very efficient. You learn to do whatever you need to do. And it really helps to have a supporting and loving partner. It really helps to try to stay healthy, lots of sleep and healthy eating, but also it helps to have a mental balance. A lot of people, I think, tend to do too much and get burned out. When we get really enthusiastic about our activism, our work, our family, our life, we go overboard. And I've learned that trying to balance everything can only happen if you don't go overboard. And so, I'm not the most active activist. There are people out there who do so much more than I do, but I know that I wouldn't be able to sustain it if I went overboard, if I sacrificed on sleep and eating, etc. So I want to be in there for the long haul. And the only way I can do it for the long haul is by doing it in moderation, is by realizing my limits and knowing, how far I can go before I absolutely should stop, so that I can balance everything. And somehow it manages to work.
Right. And how have you been able to organize caregiving, for example, for your son?
With great difficulty. We're lucky we have a preschool that we found, but it's very tough out there. It's amazing. The government doesn't pay any attention to what you're supposed to do between birth and when your child becomes of the age to go to public school. You're on your own. You have to figure out how to have a job as well as afford unaffordable childcare. And so, two people working and earning money and just barely scraping by and being able to pay the mortgage is just how we do it. And so we've got our son in preschool. And it sucks because I'd much rather, see him every single day during the day, but I have to go 8 hours without seeing him every day and just hope that his caregivers are giving him the best possible, which I know they are. So
right. And just finally, mothers are so under attack and nurturing so devalued, as though it's not important. It really is important to do just about anything else, but that. And, for women like yourself, I mean, you're managing. Just imagine the situation of a single mother, for example, a low-income single mother trying to make it with all of the pressures that are on here. And now these budget cuts we're going to be talking about later in the program.
I can't imagine it. And, there are many women who, because the cost of childcare is so high, end up sacrificing their careers for a few years because it's actually cheaper for them to stay at home and take care of their kids. And of course, it's also preferable to them. But if they do want to work, it's actually difficult because the amount of time they'd spend working plus how much money they would spend on childcare, it's very, very difficult. But yeah, this is the hallmark of our government that believes in rugged individualism, to be kind, but it's all about looking out for yourself. And in such a situation, single mothers are just considered expendable pawns, and we have to change that. And I hope people do that by listening to your program and by coming out to the Mothers March on this weekend.
Right.
And standing up for ourselves and demanding, it's not a privilege, it's a right for us to have the kinds of things that other countries enjoy. So many countries, including developing countries, much poorer than ours.
Right, and the work of mothers, Sonali, it's the hardest job I've ever done. And I do a lot of activism and everything else. I've been in the UN movement, but being a mom, nothing has been more challenging.
But also more rewarding. And I have to say that it's this
Absolutely.
weird combination of challenging and rewarding. And, people ask if it's so hard, well, why do you do it? Well, you wouldn't know until you have a child. It's amazing. But at the same time, it shouldn't just be your individual responsibility to take care of your child. Society depends on healthy children. This is our future, and this society doesn't give us enough to take care of ourselves and our children. We're supposed to be on our own, and how American women do it, it's hard to fathom, particularly single women. It's really hard to fathom, but they need all our support.
Right. Well, Sonali Kohatkar, thank you for taking time to join us.
Thank you very much.
All righty, Sonali Kohatkar, host of Uprising and also with the Afghan Women's Mission. We